Oftentimes, to periodize for strength sport, what we start off with is learning a skill, refining a skill, building strength, and then backing off to do a hypertrophy block so that we're overall stronger to then refine the process yet again. What I want to talk about today is using strength to promote hypertrophy, so doing the process in reverse. So fundamentally what we're looking at here is getting stronger to get bigger, simply put. There's a 2021 study done by Carvalho et al. That actually demonstrated this effect. Essentially, what they did was they had two groups. One group did 8 weeks of pure hypertrophy training, while another group did a 3-week microcycle of strength training first, and then 5 weeks of hypertrophy training. And the mixed modal group, the strength and hypertrophy group, actually had more muscle growth than the pure hypertrophy group. Why would this be the case? Well, despite recent evidence kind of downplaying the importance of time under tension, progressive tension overload, as in increasing the mechanical tension on the tissues involved, is still a prime driver of growth. This is likely why stretch position exercises, for instance, are such a robust stimulus. But that notwithstanding, let's kind of reverse engineer this process here. So, we do hypertrophy blocks prior to strength blocks because ostensibly a greater cross-sectional area makes for a stronger muscle. It does, marginally, but really what hypertrophy does is it makes for a muscle with more strength potential. Sure, physically a bigger muscle is going to be a little bit stronger, but it'll be significantly stronger once you bake in those neuromuscular adaptations. And that's kind of where we see one of the major pitfalls of just pressing volume with hypertrophy training, is that hypertrophy training essentially lacks the same neural adaptations that low rep, high load strength training does. You simply can't do sets of 10 to 15 at 85% 1RM, because if you could, it wouldn't be 85% of 1RM. And you can, to some extent, use strength for hypertrophy with high frequency training, cluster sets, things like this. But then you're talking about either very long or very fatiguing or both lifting sessions, which are untenable for most of us in this discussion, unless, lifting is our job. What seems to be the case in this Carvalho study is that by front loading that strength block, the individuals that did the strength plus hypertrophy training kind of baked in some high-end neural adaptations so that they had greater capacity to then do hypertrophy training later. It's kind of like the lifting equivalent of if you did a lot of sprint work on the front end to increase your VO2 max so that then you would have a higher level of zone 2 base building on the tail end. It's like the peak broadening the base as opposed to the base driving up the peak, if that makes sense. So let's say you want to give this a try. You want to do an 8-week strength plus hypertrophy block. What are some recommendations? Well, I would design it similar to the design of the study, where you start off with a 3-week strength block followed by a 5-week hypertrophy block. Now, we're already kind of well versed at this point in the kind of general rep ranges and loading of hypertrophy, anywhere between 5 and 30, or some say even up to 50 repetitions. So we would go about our final 5 weeks the same way we regularly train, although presumably with heavier loads and therefore greater stimulus. But how would we structure that first 3-week microcycle? Well, first of all, what we would want to do is use compound movements. Movements where, since we're training for strength, we can use multiple joints and load the movement as much as is physically possible. Barbell type movements, dumbbell movements, so like not leg extensions, but squats. Not like lateral raises, but overhead barbell presses, clean and jerks, snatches. Not rear delt reverse flies, but barbell rows and deadlifts, things like this. Compound movements, big loads distributed over a wide variety of muscles. Heavy squatting, heavy pulling, heavy pressing. Now, in terms of rep ranges, Pretty much anything under 5 is where we want to live for this 3-week microcycle. You can always try to very tightly titrate your repetition and loading dose with something like A.S. Pelpin's chart, but I strongly recommend triples to 5s. Now, you can do doubles and singles, but triples, 4s, and 5s kind of have this special, not quite all the way indexed to strength, but also not quite fully into the hypertrophy range as well. It's enough repetitions per set that you still get a meaningful hypertrophy stimulus, but it's heavy enough that there's also tremendous neural adaptation as well. And it's kind of that sweet spot in between the two where you're lifting reasonably heavy, but the injury risk is also minimal and you don't incur quite so high a fatigue cost. I love triples for strength skill practice, especially doing triples of what is around a 5 RM. So it's like 2 reps in reserve. Then you can really push that intramuscular coordination, work on that strength skill. And then when that triple turns into an easy 5, then you can push it for like 7 or 8, closer to failure for hypertrophy. This is also a great mixed modal approach to kind of regain some of your lost strength when coming back from an injury. I'm currently using this right now to progress my dumbbell incline press 2 years after a pretty gnarly pec tear. So to recap, what we're gonna do is we're gonna get compound movements that we also have a high degree of skill with, a high degree of movement fidelity so that we reduce our injury risk. We're gonna do 3 weeks of strength work, so triples, 4s, and 5s, followed by 5 or however many weeks of hypertrophy with presumably greater loads due to our newfound intramuscular coordination. Like and subscribe to support the YouTube channel and comment below on topics that you would like me to make content on in the future. Consistency is a superpower. Stay in the fight. Thanks for watching.